We had Magders on the corner of Regent and Queen, and that's where I got my dresses and shoes. There was Mulholland's dry goods store if you wanted any materials or yard goods for sewing, and that was we sewed a lot in those days. I don't know why. I don't know whether we were a little peculiar that we made a lot of clothes, but that's where we got our materials, and that's where you went for your sheets and pillowcases. The Niagara Home Bakery, we bought our bread there. We got our ice cream there. They had actually scooped ice cream out into cardboard containers. Ice cream cones were 5 cents. I remember my grandmother saying, "Would you get us some ice cream cones?" I'd run up and come home with 3 ice cream cones dripping. Let's see, on grocery stores, we had lots of grocery stores. I think we shopped mainly at McClellan's, but I do remember Marino's fruit. He was an Italian, obviously, and all the fruit was out front, so it was very European looking, so it was quite different for us. And then, Fields Drug Store. I can still smell that. It was just wonderful. All the Yardleys and powders and everything was all on tables, all down the middle, and you'd walk in, and it was wonderful. The fragrance coming from Fields Drug Store, and that's where we went. Then there was Bates Drug Store too, closer. That's where we went for bubble gum and things like that you wouldn't find at the apothecary, because that was sort of more reserved for those Christmas presents and soaps and fine things that you'd give your grandmother. And then there's a 5 and 10 cent store. We had a 5 and 10 cents that you probably call the dollar store now, but it was a large, very large store. My grandfather had a business in town, the W.H. Harrison and Sons, and the 3 boys, Alan, Jack, and Don, were in business with him. And the hardware store was where the new post office is now. And we used to be able to go downtown and shop for everything.
Beautiful little town had everything a family could ever need. Grocery stores included Reed's, Marino's, and McClellan's, plus Pepe's on the corner of Mary and Mississauga Streets. McClellan's often delivered to our home. I remember Bert Hall in the cheese department at McClellan's. Tourists used to come from far and wide to buy his flavorful aged cheese. Also on Queen Street, we had Art Wilson's GM dealership and auto repair, George Wilson's gas station. Henry Dick's service station was on the corner of Mary and Mississauga. We also had several restaurants, such as the Thistle and a Chinese restaurant. I think it was called Club 19. The Riverside Inn and the Prince of Wales were considered to be dives and something to stay away from.
Like as kids, we would always be going to the local variety stores and buying penny candy and candy and stuff like that. But things started getting more expensive. For the locals, it wasn't the same, and more people on the main street, which we weren't used to seeing, because the main street was, you'd always see kids and that on the main street, but now you were seeing more adults, and the mom and pop grocery stores started being bought out by different chains. Like I remember Baskin Robbins came in. We thought, oh, good, that's going to be ice cream. But a lot of people from Niagara Falls were buying stores on the main street, and it changed things. They didn't make enough money to do the renovations, and the buildings were starting to fall down. Well, these new people would come in and spend more money fixing the buildings up, creating jobs for young people too. Like they were working in I remember Donna's Ice Cream, which used to be Campbell's Dairy. Now it was Donna's Ice Cream Shop, and a lot of kids in town worked in that ice cream shop, just to serve an ice cream and things like that. And a lot of the places were hiring local kids for the summertime when it was busy. The people in town didn't have the money to put into the store. Before that, all the kids in town worked on farms, picked fruit, and did stuff like that. That was the only way you could make any money. And things started changing. As a young boy, we used to go down to when the Cuga pulled in, and the tourists would come from Toronto. we would dive for money. Like they would, and they would throw money, and you would dive for it, and you'd put it in your mouth, keep it in your mouth. But so that when the tourists first started coming was on the Cayuga, and then of course the Cayuga stopped running because the people were driving cars.
The SS Cayuga would come here from Toronto. It was a boat that would arrive, I remember, at 11 o'clock in the morning. Myself and several other young guys were down there diving for money. We would call up to the tourists on the boat, "Throw your money down, folks." And they would toss coins over the side, and we would dive for them. We would dive down, pick up the coin, show it to them that we had received it, and then put it in our mouth for $3.50 in each cheek here. They were fun times. And then the boat would go to Queenston, and it would turn around, and it would come back at 1 o'clock, and we'd dive again for money. People who didn't believe that we were as good at it as because the coin, when it goes down, it goes down at quite a pace. So it caused you to develop an anticipation of where the coin was going, so you could catch it this way or that way, and I got quite good at it.
Well, I think the beach was a highlight growing up because it's completely different what we see today. And there used to be a lot of sand. It was a really sandy beach. And if I remember correctly, there was so much sand that used to drift over King Street, down where the bend is. And they would bring the plow down, the town works would come in and plow the sand off the beach. And then there was, I think it was the Lions Club, they had like a little food concessionary stand there. So, people would actually go down and suntan, swim, there was like the food stand there. So it was quite the event. And there used to be a great, the bluff isn't as big as it is now. I don't know if they took some of it away, but there was a great little bluff there, and you used to be able to ride our bikes and just sort of slam down and go down below. And the other thing about the beach was that Queens Royal Park, and in the winter they would set up an ice skating rink, and I thought that was really cool because that's where I learned to skate, and it was like they had lights set up, and it was like a little fairy tale land.
Parents came over here in, I think it was September 1952, but my dad got a job here at Shepherd Boats probably in October or something like that. So he came down here with a family, and we lived in a cabin right by the Bishop Fish down here where the foghorn blows, because I can remember waking up all the time. And my dad worked at Shepherd Boats, so so I was 4 years old, and we lived in the smallest place, like it was 2 rooms. I remember the great outhouse, that was famous, right? There was an outhouse, but very close to Shepherd Boats. Then he took a year off and worked at the hydro project in Niagara Falls because there was big money there. So he went there and risked his life working up there. But then they wanted him back here, so he got a big raise. And because he was a cabinet maker, a draftsman, and a boat builder, and he was just a very handy guy. The whole town was terrific. The whole town. I mean, we had Boy Scouts, and where the Shaw Festival is, that's where the Boy Scout Lodge was. So we had Cubs there and Scouts there, and that was a great town. Went to Parliament Oaks School, played baseball.
My fondest memories, I think, and one of the things that was a big part of my life was playing softball back in the 60s, and we'd play our little league games at Parliament Oaks School and St. Vincent and Virgil would have a team, and so would Queenston, and we'd play all those throughout the year, and somehow I think have a championship game. I don't have things. And for a few years, we had a school team that Parliament Oak would go and play Bethel and Virgil. And I can remember running home from Parliament Oak School to our home on Victoria Street for lunch, and my mom would always have lunch ready for us, and we would have a quick bowl of soup and a sandwich, and I mean quick, like in less than 5 minutes, and I would run back to school because we used to play a game called Scrub, where you had to, in the order in which you arrived at the diamond, you had to touch the home plate, and you were first up, second up, and then you were pitcher, first base, second base, third base, all the way out to the outfield. And if there weren't enough players to play Scrub, we played a game called 21 Up, where of course we'd have someone would take the ball and hit it to a number of other players who would get points for receiving a ground ball. I can think was maybe 1 point or 3 points. A first bounce was 5 points. A pop fly was 7 points. And the first person to get 21 points would then be the next batter, and that's how it went.
Over Niagara Falls tumble thousands of gallons of water to join a vast ice jam that stretches for 9 miles. The appalling weather that has recently swept much of America and Canada has frozen this vast area of the Niagara River. Now the great mass of ice and snow has become a menace to buildings along the river bank. A custom shed is in danger, and the giant new hydroelectric plant may suffer as the ice is pushed on downriver towards Ontario. More than £250,000 worth of damage has already been caused by the ice, which is 30 feet deep in many places. A small church awaits its fate as the ice moves on relentlessly.
I remember the ice jam in '55. It was,
Yeah, I remember that.
yeah, it was packed right from the mouth of the Niagara River all the way to Niagara Falls, brink of Niagara Falls. You can't see it now, but because it's been 50 years or so. But the ice was so high along the river that you could see it. It was up about 50 feet on the riverbank. You could see all the foliage had been ripped out with the ice. Of course, that's all we're going over. They tried to, with the American Corps of Engineers, went out to the mouth of the Niagara River and tried to set off dynamite, which was like setting off a firecracker, because it didn't do anything. And eventually, of course, it broke up by itself.
Dad, he remembers one time walking across the ice to the States, and he said he went to the show or a theater or something, I don't know what. But after he came down to walk back across the ice and it was all gone. So, but yeah, I remember, well, there've been more than one ice jam. So one of '55 is the one that everybody refers to, but I remember the ice being in the 70s, chock-a-block. I remember the icebreaker going out into the lake and then getting a good head of steam up and riding right up on the ice, trying to break it and going back out and working its way up the river, literally. I remember watching that myself in the 70s. But the big ice jam of '55, you could see all along the banks the striations from where the ice had dug out the banks and cleaned it, clean as a whistle, not a thing on the banks, up 50, 60 feet, particularly up at Queenston. There are still some areas, not very many, but still some areas, yeah, where you don't have any growth at all on the cliffs.
They came to their 8th World Jamboree in Ontario. The Jamboree is not a convention or a forum. There are no compulsory meetings or discussions. The Scouts meet together only to meet each other. Here in the shadow of ancient battlements at Niagara-on-the-Lake, new lines were written in the brighter pages of Canada's history. The story of youth on the march towards peace and understanding for all the nations of the world. The last leg of the journey was by lake steamer, by chartered bus, and by foot. A party of Brazilian scouts drove all the way in a specially fitted jeep. The only casualties, 4 tires and a crankshaft. Now the job of building a city begins. A city of tents where the average age of the inhabitants is just 16. Although most of the tents are much the same in appearance, each community soon takes on an individuality all its own. Pride of country is inherent in all Boy Scouts, and their colorful flags flutter from dozens of flagstaffs. Other devices are used for identification too. Every group brings from his own country traditional symbols of his race and culture. The Sea Scouts add a little salt to the atmosphere. The gates leading to the contingent camps were ingenious and colorful. The Scouts designed and built the gates themselves, and sometimes, just by chance, they included some fine tourist promotion. The tents are up. Communications have been set up to link the entire camp. Everyone is on the alert, for this is opening day. Now comes the big parade with 42 countries taking part. The units are in alphabetical order, beginning with Armenia. In this parade, you will see representative scouts from all the contingents attending the jamboree. Boys of many races and creeds drawn together in a common bond and a common aim. Off to visit one of the 7 wonders of the world, Niagara Falls. The line of buses extended over a mile, every one of them jam-packed with cheering, singing scouts on an outing they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Here at Queenston Heights, far below the towering statue of General Brock, the scouts absorbed more of the history of early Canada, on the site where the history was made. This large floral clock, centered with the Scout emblem, was built by Ontario Hydro. A team of experts from the Swimming and Water Safety Division of the Canadian Red Cross kept a watchful eye on the Scouts during swimming periods. They were responsible for the safety of nearly 1,500 boys in 4 daily swimming periods. Last one in is a dummy. The 8th World Scout Jamboree comes to a close. With one voice, the Scouts pledge themselves anew to the ideals and principles laid down 42 years ago by the husband of Lady Baden-Powell.
They had different parades with and I can't remember the years they were, but I know I was on a float for one, and it was the Niagara Canners float, which is a winery on the Lakeshore Road. But Niagara Canners was a canning factory there before it was a winery. And I know I was on that float. And I was quite a bit younger when I was in those floats. I must have been maybe 15, 16. In the summer, like a lot of activity revolved around the dock area. Like we all swam at the dock. I always swam at the dock. I didn't swim in the lake very much. It was deep water and we liked it there. And they had a big tower that you could dive off. That's where the jet boats go out now. The firemen always put on something on the Labor Day. And they used to have a greasy pole, and they had an old telephone pole that they'd rig up, and they'd grease it all with oil, black goo, and they put a $10 bill on the end of it. And the guys would have to try and get out to that to get the money, and the first one to get the money could keep it. But of course everybody'd be falling off into the water if they couldn't get there because it was so greasy. But that was something that I remember from always, every year they had that on and the firemen were very active in town. They used to have the ball on New Year's. Before the firemen had that ball, it used to be called the fisherman's ball, but I don't remember that because we had a whole bunch of fishermen that had little shacks along the edge of the dock area, and their nets used to hang behind and be drying. There used to be a lot of good fish here. We had a fish market down at the dock, and Archie Bishop ran the fish market, and he had it for many years. So I spent a lot of time at the dock.
Growing up on and thinking about the main street, I always thought about how these two groups interacted, and it wasn't like, you know, gangs. It was just that they're just two different types of groups that, you know, if they were partying, they would mix it up or not. But it wasn't like, you know, well, if you're over there, don't you come over here. But just people would gravitate to these two different groups, and I think that's the one thing that stands out for me on the main street. I guess the people who hung around the Chinese restaurant, like the Club 19, and were considered more the rougher, tougher kind of group. And fraternities used to play a pretty big role back then because, you know, I guess depending on which fraternity you were in, you were considered a certain type of person, you know, whether you're a jock or whether you're a party kind of fraternity. The same with, like, I think there was maybe 2 girls fraternities, so I don't know, I guess you're being labeled, by being in certain fraternities. And geographically too, though, I mean, there was the people who lived in town, and then people who would come in from the farms, and so, you know, so that was another group that would come in, and you know, I'm going back to probably when I was in high school, and if I remember correctly, you know, we probably had about 1,600 kids in Niagara District. So you can imagine, you know, on a summer weekend, or even just on the weekends when everyone would just come down to the main street, and then from there, you know, find little parties, or, you know, just find things to do. So there's quite a group hanging around on the main street, and you know, it's quite funny. You know, like today I walked uptown to get to the mail, and it's like you don't see anybody. You know, it's like you go uptown now, even when it's nice, you don't see anybody that you really know. Like you don't see kids hanging around. I don't know, it's just so different now.